Sweet. We are live. All right. Let's see. Probably give it a couple minutes and then start getting into the action. Oh, it's kind of awkward to like stare at your computer without anything going on. I'm just gonna go ahead and do it.
Go for it, man.
Cool. So we got the live stream going on. Hopefully everybody's staying safe with the COVID-19s. But got a 3-part series going on here. We're gonna do an intro into Amplify. We're gonna build a full stack application with Amplify. So for this whole entire application, like before I guess we get into that, I'll talk about who I am really quick before I jump the gun. But my name is Austin Lovelace. I'm a AWS community hero, cloud architect at PhotoBucket, and application architect at HireGiraffe.com. So okay, now that we got that boring stuff out of the way, so we're doing a 3-part series. It's going to be like 1 part every month. The third Wednesday of the month. So for part 1, it's going to be intro to Amplify. We're going to talk about what is Amplify, and we have a pre-built application. We're going to plug Amplify into the application, talk about what's going on in the app, and just kind of get familiar with what Amplify is. So for part 2, we're going to do a deeper dive. We're going to talk about like more complex directives. We'll talk about that a little bit in the intro to Amplify. We'll connect multiple services like S3 and have like DynamoDB and everything else connected into our Amplify application. We're going to improve our API that we have on the intro, and it's going to be a bit more complex. We'll add a CI/CD pipeline, and then we'll continue like styling and building the application. And then for part 3, we're going to have scaling serverless. We're going to talk about like what does this cost at scale and how to improve performance and reduce cost. So should be able to get some AWS credits and just start like firing away at the application. I'll show you guys like basically doing like a million requests with how the application is, like what is our cost, how does it scale, what's the performance, and like have a bunch of metrics and go through that and like how to improve it. It's like the general high level overview of our 3-part series. So before going into anything deeper, talk about the 3-part series, kind of comparing it to Medium. So if you go to Medium, Medium's an application where you can write blogs. Our application is going to be pretty simple, and it's going to be a blog app. The reason for that is Amplify gives us like templates, and so we're going to use like their basic template and then build on top of that. So if you come here and you look at Medium's page, you can see up here that they've got like different headlines for like blogs. So this would be like you make an account. I've got the AWS Meetup group account here, and let's say we wanted to see like I don't know, what was in Forge, and see like, okay, Forge is a blog and they have multiple posts. So they've got posts all over the place, and they've got like different people who can post on their blog, and like little bits about like the title of the blog, a thumbnail for the blog, who posted it, how long it is, stuff like that. So that's pretty much like all that you would have on this page. And then from there we would go and we'd be like, okay, let's see, something about airplanes. I never thought I'd miss airplanes. And then this would be an actual blog post, and you'd have a post page, and within that post page you'd have like your title, who posted it, you know, like the data, whatever like the blog is about, the actual like story. You can have multiple pictures we could do, and then at the bottom you'd have like see responses. This would be the equivalent of like a comment. And so that's going to be super similar to what we have in our application, and I'll come back through this again. I just want to give you guys like a high-level overview of like what's to come and what we're building from start to finish for the 3-part series. So that's kind of like a general idea of what we're going to be getting into. So the more in-depth part 1 agenda, like I said, we're going to talk about what is Amplify, why would you use Amplify, like what is Amplify doing, what resources is it using. We're going to build the full stack app, and then we'll have like some Q&A time. And if you have any questions like during, I think you're allowed to post a question inside the comments in the chat for the live stream, and I've got that open so I can like monitor that whenever you guys have any questions, and we can have questions like just whenever you have a question, feel free to put in the chat. All right, so moving on, let's see. So first, like, we could get through some slides. I'm not a big fan of doing slides, so I talk quickly through these. I think it's better to learn like as we're going through. But just from a high level, Amplify, basically it's this JavaScript library that we can use. It's a npm package you can install and have like a CLI built, and then you're able to quickly and easily build a production-ready application that's serverless. So it would use like DynamoDB, you could use API Gateway, AppSync, which we'll talk about, which is what we're going to be using. And basically we'll have like all these services that will connect together and build us our API really easily with Amplify. And I'll get more into that whenever we talk about like a schema and schema development and stuff. But if you've ever like heard of like schema driven development, or I don't know if I made that up, but that's pretty much what's going on. We have a schema file, start writing into our schema file, and it builds all of our application. So we'll show that in a minute. That's like a high level description of what Amplify is. So why would you want to use it? I think like a pretty like obvious use case initially would be like it's great for prototyping because you get it off the ground really quickly. You have like your application that you're just trying to see like, oh, I want to build a blog app. Like, how would I do that? I want it to be like pretty quick and easy to build too. I don't have a big DevOps team. I don't have a bunch of people who I work for or who work for me who have knowledge with AWS and can like scale an AWS architecture, and they don't really know much about serverless or lambdas or DynamoDB or any of these things. Like Amplify is a great tool for at least like figuring out if you can do this. And then, like I said, with having a small team, like if you don't have a DevOps team that's like proficient with Amplify or with AWS and can like monitor like scaling servers and managing like a traditional AWS infrastructure that's not serverless, like going serverless is a pretty awesome, that's a pretty big pro to going serverless, is that you're not managing as much of the infrastructure. You're not having to worry about, do I have enough resources? If I get like a random spike because my blog went viral, is it going to crash my application? Like AWS will handle that for you. And so this is a cool thing with Amplify, is that you're pretty much set up out of the box with best practices. You're ready to go. You have a small dev team. You don't really know exactly what you're doing yet. Amplify is like really good to help you out. And I mean, like if you're just trying to move quickly, like, and you're a bigger company, I think it's still like a pretty awesome tool. And then it has capabilities for doing offline things. And this is with the tool called AppSync. We're not going to go super deep into this, but just know it kind of exists. So why would we want to use Amplify? So, or what does Amplify use? So for what we're doing for the intro, we're going to be using Cognito for our authentication. So this is going to be pretty much like if you've used an OAuth provider, or if you use like Auth0, or if you used like built your own authentication, this is basically Amazon's way of managing it for you. So Cognito is their serverless authentication service. AppSync, if you're familiar with GraphQL, this is basically Amazon's managed GraphQL service. And so we can write like a big schema in there that connects to multiple data sources like a Lambda, DynamoDB, Elasticsearch, all kinds of different things. And AppSync will connect to all these things with something called velocity templating language. And that will basically allow us to query everything without having to have a Lambda involved. And this is really good because that means that you only have one layer in here, which I'll show you guys. A quick diagram to kind of emphasize the point. So this is like a really basic diagram because our application is pretty basic for right now. So essentially, like you have, client makes a request, our front end lives in an S3 bucket. We authenticate our users with Cognito, and it hits AppSync. So the point of showing you this is to talk about this VTL. It's called Apache Velocity Templating Language. And VTL is like a really weird language that just like connects to all these different services and can query our database and not have a Lambda involved. So like all CRUD operations, we could even do filtering. We could do like mutations to where we like constructed our data to be something different and like did like if statements and conditionals and loops, all with VTL. Like it's pretty complex. And it saves a lot of money because you don't have to run a Lambda in the middle of this, and it improves latency because you don't have to have a Lambda in front of this. And so there's no Lambdas in any of this architecture. And then the last thing is DynamoDB. DynamoDB is Amazon's managed NoSQL database. You read the little blurb here, talk about like why DynamoDB is pretty awesome. It says it can handle more than 10 trillion requests per day and can support peaks of more than 20 million requests per second. It's a pretty awesome database in that you're not having to manage, like how we talked about before with this whole serverless thing. You're not having to manage like if your database can scale and if you're able to like support the capacity of your blog getting viral and being able to like stay up and ready to handle all those different requests. That, and honestly, like depending on how you structure your data, of course, it's a pretty affordable database. This whole architecture is pretty affordable. We'll find out more about that whenever we get into testing the actual cost in part 3, but I'm curious to see what happens. I'm on the side of thinking that this is going to be pretty affordable though. So, like I said, go through that really quickly. Quick recap. I just wanted to give you like high level definitions of what everything is, why we're doing Amplify, what Amplify is, and what it's using behind the scenes. So I think with that all being said, like if you guys have any questions, feel free to post it in the chat. Otherwise, what we're gonna go ahead and do is just start building it, because I think that'll like really make a lot of things make more sense. So I'll give you guys a second, but okay. So I posted the repo in the chat. I'll go ahead and post it again in case you guys missed it. So there's the repo. What you're going to want to do is just go ahead and clone the repo. If you don't want to clone it right now, or if I'm talking too quickly, like this is going to be like recorded and on YouTube, so feel free to come back and follow up on this if you miss anything. Don't feel like you have to follow along like directly with me as I'm doing it. So real quickly, like 3-part series. This is pretty much what we're building in this first part. The styling is pretty bare bones because it's like the very beginning. This will look a lot different. I'll try and replicate like something of a medium type looking application once it gets more built, but for now it does what it needs to do. So you go in and clone the repo. I've already got mine cloned. So I'll give you guys a minute to clone the repo if you haven't already, but I'm probably going to move rather quickly, so we might as well just go ahead and jump into some things. So what's in here is I made like a root folder just because this is going to be multiple parts and I wanted to use a single repo. But for this part, we're going to have the intro to Amplify. This is going to be the folder, the directory that we're working in for this class. So I'm going to go ahead and change directories into that folder. Okay, so what's in here right now is just a front-end folder in this GraphQL config YAML. And this was actually built by Amplify, but I went ahead and left it because it's already like kind of set up to what we need. But you'll see the prompts of how it's constructed whenever we do our Amplify creation. Oh, you know what we need to do before that actually? If you guys haven't already done this, what we can do is install Amplify and configure the CLI. Jump a little bit ahead. So I'll go ahead and post this link in the chat for you guys. But what we're going to do first before we actually get into the repo is we're going to configure Amplify before jumping into everything. So if you go to that link, you should see the npm install -g AWS Amplify CLI. So I could go ahead and run that. Mine's already installed, but I think it should, oops, pasted the wrong thing. So go ahead and install that. If you've ever used like the AWS CLI before and created profiles, this is what this is essentially going to do, this Amplify configure. If you haven't, we're going to go ahead and run through that so that you guys can see what that looks like. If I do it too quickly or miss anything, like this video will also walk you through that. And I think this is like a pretty short video. And this guy right here is Nader Dabbit. He's like a software developer advocate for Amplify and AppSync, and he's like super smart at building nice, awesome Amplify applications. And he's got a repo that has like different Amplify applications, and he's got an O'Reilly book too that has like all different serverless Amplify AppSync applications. We'll give that a second to install. All right, looks like we're getting close. Cool. So now that we got the Amplify CLI installed, what we could do next is run Amplify configure. So like I said, this is like configuring a profile in your AWS account. If you've already done that with like the regular AWS CLI, you can skip this if you want, but if you haven't, then you should definitely set this up. So this will go ahead and redirect me to my AWS account, and it prompts you on what to do. So you say like, okay, I've gone to the account, I've signed in, hit enter, then it's like, cool, what region are you in? So I'm in US East 1. What's your username gonna be? I don't know, let's call it intro to Amplify user. Sweet. So now it's going to bring us to IAM, I believe. Yep. And it's going to ask for programmatic access. And it's automatically going to say like, give me admin access. And then you can go to like next review and then create the user. And then you're going to want to like copy and paste these, your access key and your secret access key. Once you get to that point, you can hit enter and you'll paste it here. So just copy that access key ID and that secret access key, and then you're pretty much set up. I'm not going to show that on a live stream, but you get the idea of what you need to do to configure the CLI. So with that set up, now we could go ahead and start configuring the actual Amplify application. So we've got the Amplify CLI installed. We talked about what Amplify was. We've got the Amplify CLI configured. We've got our repo cloned. Time to start writing some code. So after you change directories into the intro to Amplify directory, what you want to do first is we could go ahead and like run Amplify. Let's just run Amplify. So we run Amplify. You can see like all the different commands that are available to you, and you can see that it's installed correctly if you get this response back. You can see the different categories. So these categories are like what we have access to being able to build. So for example, you could see down here these like different options. So it's like whatever category and then whatever action you want to take. So if I wanted to add an API, I would run like Amplify API and then add. And then you could kind of like get an idea and learn a lot from just running Amplify, seeing like what different options you have here, and then kind of figuring out like the CLI and what's available. Because most of the commands are built with the CLI. And so that means like most of your application is built to the CLI, which, I mean, love it or hate it, like it's really easy comparatively to writing all the CloudFormation that's behind it. So, and you do have access to all the CloudFormation that's behind it if you wanted to like extract it and build your own application, but we're not going to do that. So what we want to do first after we've seen this is we want to go ahead and create an API. So we're going to Amplify API add. Oh, forgot we need to initialize our application first. So let's see what initialization does. So it says it initializes a new project, sets up deployment resources in the cloud, and it makes your project ready for Amplify. So Amplify init. It's going to ask us like what's the name of our project going to be. It's going to be intro to Amplify. The name of the environment. I like to do like how the Amplify docs suggest is if you're working in a bigger team. I know that it would make sense to do like prod and dev and stuff like that, but I like to go with whatever my Git branch is called. because I think it makes it a little bit like easier to understand whenever you're working in like a bigger team and you have like multiple people working in the same Amplify environment. So I'm going to call mine master. And there's a lot of commands that we run with Amplify that look very similar to Git. We have an Amplify status, which shows us the status of our Amplify environment, and we have a Git status, shows us the status of like the changes in our repository. Like a lot of it is like really similar. So after you run Amplify init, you choose a name for the project. You choose a name for the environment. You can call it whatever you want, but I like to keep it the same as my Git branch. And then we need to choose our text editor. So mine's Visual Studio Code. What type of app are we building? It's going to be JavaScript. We are building a React app. Our directory is frontend/source. And our build directory is frontend/source. Our build command is npm run build. Yep. And all of that is generated, all these commands are generated from create React app, which this isn't going to be like super deep into the front end side of things, but create React app is just similar to Amplify. It's a framework that we can use to easily generate a React application. So that's what I use to build our React app. So this is where this do you want to use an AWS profile prompt, it says yes or no, so we're going to want to say yes. So this is where we just configured our Amplify configure, and we created our IAM user. This is what this did. So I've already done this before, and I called mine AWS meetup group before, so that's what I'm going to use. And this is going to automatically create all of our AWS environment into our specific AWS account. Since like I have a couple different companies I work for, I have to have like multiple different profiles to get into, their development environments or prod environments and be able to use Amplify and use the CLI. And so I use the profiles to be able to do that. And that's what Amplify is doing as well. So that it's easy to have like a multi-account AWS application, so that you would have like a dev account and a stage account, a prod account, and you could separate all the different environments really easily with the AWS profiles. So before we do anything else, let's go ahead and talk about what just happened during this. See, we have like all these initializing project in the cloud, create in progress, create complete. So this is all responses from CloudFormation. CloudFormation is just a tool that's used to basically write our infrastructure as code and deploy it in AWS for like automation purposes, more or less. So that's what Amplify uses. So it also generated us this folder here, and it created us a config file. So a couple of these are for our local environment. Oops, let's close this down a little bit. Come on. All right. So like I said, this is for our local environment. So our Amplify environment is master, and just tells us a little bit of data about like what we're doing here. We did use a profile. Same thing, like this is just saying like the directory on my laptop where this is ran at. And all of this is in a git ignore. Like you don't want to remove this from the git ignore that it generates for you, because this is going to be different if you're working in a team and you have other people working on the environment. This is going to be generated for them whenever they run an Amplify init if you're working on like a team. And so you want to make sure to leave this as is and not change the git ignore. But the one that is kind of important is this project config JSON. So as you can see, it has that front-end SRC, which it generated from these prompts we put in earlier when I was asking us what our source directory path and distribution directory path is. So that's kind of why it asked us that, so it can build this file for us so that it knows whenever we deploy this or whenever it makes changes to it and generates this code or whatever, it knows like where to put the code at. So then we've got our backend folder. Actually, before we get to that, let's talk about this team provider info. So really quickly, this is again like what all we've deployed. So this is going to be basic stuff that Amplify's deployed for us already, and this will get bigger as we add like Lambda functions and GraphQL and or like AppSync. What's it called? An AppSync API. It will add all of that here. And then it shows you the different environments. So if you created another environment and you had like multiple environments in Amplify, which we're going to show in the next iteration of the 3-part series, it would have like another branch here with all the resources in that one. And so really quickly, like another reason that Amplify I think is like a good tool to use, kind of sound like a salesman here, but this is cool for, like, let's say you had this in production and you wanted to have you wanted to test something, like you wanted to prototype like a new feature and be like, okay, I wonder what it would look like to set up Elasticsearch with my environment, but I don't want to mess with my dev environment. I don't want to mess with master. I just want to like start fresh and test it and see if it even makes sense. Well, you can completely do that. And I guess we are kind of jumping a little bit ahead for what's going to be the next one, but I think this is important. So you can basically like do like Amplify env add, and this will generate you like another Amplify environment, or you could use an existing one. And then that way it'll completely recreate everything that you've already created, and you can create new things without affecting your current environment that you have set up. And so that way it's like all decoupled and separate, and you can basically just completely destroy it. Say Elasticsearch broke everything, it doesn't matter. You can just delete that environment because it doesn't actually touch anything that was application code, or like not application, but production code. So that's a really cool feature to do, just all the automation that's built into it. And then the backend folder is just going to have like, this is going to be where all of our resources stay. So with that said, let's go ahead and create our first resource. So we're going to create an API first. So do Amplify add API, or I guess you could do Amplify API add. I think that either way works. So then we could do GraphQL or REST. We're going to use GraphQL for ours. This uses AppSync. I'll show you guys that in the console. So this name doesn't work even though it prompts us for it. So what we're going to do is do like intro to, let's see if camel case works. Cool. So our API is called intro to Amplify. It asks us what our default authorization type for the API is going to be. We've got a couple of different options here, and it's not that you're limited to using one. Just whenever it creates it by default, you're only allowed to really select one at the beginning. So we're going to use Amazon Cognito user pool. We're going to use the default configuration. I'm going to use a username to allow people to sign in. And this can get a lot more complex. This is like the basics of what it gets. You get a lot more access to editing this and fitting it to whatever needs you have. But for the start, it's a good way to like kind of get familiar with it. So now that we've created that, it's going to go ahead and start generating us everything. So it generated us an auth folder. And within that, we have like a YAML folder, or the YAML file, which is our CloudFormation template of all of our Cognito stuff that it creates for us. And so all of that's generated. And it says, do you want advanced configuration for GraphQL? No, we do not. Do we have an annotated schema? Let's say no. Do we want to do a guided schema creation? Let's say yes. So then it gives us a couple of options. So the first one's really basic. We're not going to use that one. It's essentially just, it creates a DynamoDB table and you have to-dos. So we'll make it a little bit more interesting. We're going to do with number 2, which creates different relationships. And so a little bit of a more complex schema. And so we can go ahead and select that. And it says we want to edit our schema now. And we can hit enter. So this is basically what it built us. From here, what you can do is like we can talk about like what this is. So this is what I was talking about earlier with schema-driven development. So this, like all these prompts from the CLI and this schema file creates nearly the entire backend. It can get more intense with like this resolvers folder. You can do like custom stuff and do like your own thing. But for the most part, for the core of your application, the core for this application, everything that is a backend like cloud resource is made here through the magic of Amplify. And so part of that magic is we defining like a type, and it just proper naming convention, like a best practice is to call your models capitalized, or call your types, like just make them capitalized. Maybe that's a GraphQL best practice. I'm not 100% sure, but It's definitely like how all of these types are named. And then we have this at model, which is, these are called directives. And so this directive is going to basically say that we want to create a DynamoDB table. So this will go ahead and create us a DynamoDB table, and it will add in the fields of ID, name, and then we'll have posts. And what this is doing right now is, like we said before with the Medium example, go ahead and show you that. Like, we have the homepage of Medium, we've got like our coronavirus blog, and then we've got like whatever this is about, and then, you know, the different posts underneath that. And then they have like responses. We're going to call them comments. So this is essentially what this is doing. And so this syntax here is going to make an array. And so it's basically saying that you have a one-to-many relationship, and how that relationship is formed is by this @connection directive. And so this is going to get a little bit into the weeds, but I'll go ahead and explain it. I might have to do some Googling after this. But in DynamoDB, like similar to if you use Postgres or if you use like a different SQL database, you have like foreign keys, and you would have like a table like foreign keys that like match this ID in this table and this ID in this table, and essentially like you can create a connection or like a join. That's pretty much what this is doing. It creates something called a global secondary index, and that index is used very similar to what you would have in like a SQL database. And this one is declaring the key name to be like by blog, and that would be what your global secondary index would be called. And then it matches it to your post. And then right here we have like right here, here's the key. Okay, so right here we have the other key, and this is connecting these two together. So our posts have, or our blogs have multiple posts, and our posts have multiple comments. This is kind of what this syntax means. The array this is array syntax, so you can have like multiple in here. And then this doesn't have an array around it because a post only has one blog. Doing a many-to-many relationship we'll do in probably the next iteration. It gets quite a bit more complex, but for now, this is essentially like your one-to-many relationships. So one thing to note is that like this is a new tool, relatively new tool, and I guess they didn't do enough QAing because, like you saw, like this was completely generated for me. It doesn't compile, unfortunately. Luckily, we know how to fix it, but they did break their application recently. So we have a solve for that. I wrote a schema before that will work for this. If anybody on here is from the Amplify team, please fix this. Let's see. Okay, cool. So now we've got our new schema created, which I just copy and pasted this. If you wanted to see where I got this from, I wrote this before. If you go to an old commit, you could search through a different commit I had, like the last one from yesterday, and browse files, and you could see in the intro to Amplify folder, backend, API, and then the schema. That's where I got this from. So before we go ahead and create everything, because this is pretty much like the meat of our whole entire application, I added a different directive in here so that it would connect with our Cognito stuff. And also, if you see right here, it says the following types do not have an @auth enabled whenever we try to compile our schema. So this @auth, since we have Cognito as like our way of authenticating for being able to view our blog data, what this is going to say is the @auth directive, you can create a rule or multiple rules, but we're going to have one single rule, and it's going to say allow the owner to do all CRUD operations. So if you wanted to like type this out long form, you could do like operations and then define like what does this owner person have access to. So we could say like create, read, update, and delete, and we could define it. But if we don't define it, it's automatically enabled. And so this way, like we'll just keep it clean and we'll just leave it like this. And so this means that our owner is allowed to do everything. So if you wanted to come check out the directives, let's see, GraphQL transformation, directives. Here we go. So here's a bit of a deeper explanation if you wanted to like read it from the docs yourself about what the different directives are and such. But like I said, like @model essentially will create you a DynamoDB table. @auth creates you the creates like your auth rules, so it says like who is allowed to do this, and it's set up with Cognito with how we have it, so we can have like Cognito groups, and it can get a lot more complex. But for the basics of it, like basically if you create this object or here, if you create a comment or you create a post, only you can see it and only you can do any kind of operation to it. Which if you're thinking ahead to like why would I have a blog app that's private to only me, like I understand that. And so with the next iteration of this, we're going to change the auth rules and make them like a lot more complex and make it so that this is similar to Medium, and to where like only if you're the user who created it, you can do an update or delete, but anybody can view it, anybody can create a blog. But for now, this is going to be like how it's set up just for simplicity. So then we can hit enter and our GraphQL schema has compiled. So now what we're going to do is we're going to run a command that gives us down here. It says we can do an Amplify push. This will build all the backend local resources in the cloud. And so we can do Amplify push. But before we do that, let's do one more thing. Like I said before, we have an Amplify status command. And this is going to basically be like a get status. So we could see like what operation is about to happen, what needs to happen. Like if you've updated something, it'll tell you. If there's been no changes, it'll tell you. But so we need to create these resources. We're going to Amplify push. Amplify push will give us a similar prompt, just like we had before. Shows current environment, and it'll be like, are you sure you want to continue? We'll say yes. It'll compile the schema again, so that way you're not like gonna accidentally push, break your CloudFormation, and then have to redo it again. Before it does that, it compiles it all. And there's actually a command I can show you guys in a minute to compile it on the fly. Do that after this. And this may take a couple minutes, so we'll take like a question break after this starts getting deployed. It's going to give us a few prompts here. Okay, so we got our first prompt. It says, do you want to generate code for the newly created GraphQL schema? We're going to say yes. We want it to be JavaScript. We have the options of doing TypeScript and Flow. Just going to keep it to JavaScript. Enter the file pattern of the GraphQL queries you want to put this in. So we'll just go ahead and enter for that. Change that later. Do you want to generate all the possible queries? Yes. And maximum depth, we'll just leave that as the default too. So this will go ahead and start provisioning everything into the cloud. So if you wanted to see that happen, you could go to CloudFormation, go to your stacks. I've got a couple of old things in here, but this creates nested stacks. So our root stack is going to be what initially happened on the Amplify init. It just created us a couple of things so that our application is ready to be built. And then we have this other stack that's nested, and this is going to create us the user pool, and I think it's going to create us a few more stacks too. And it'll be like the GraphQL schema and the DynamoDB tables. And you can also see the logs happening here. So if you guys have any questions, now's a good time. This will take a couple minutes. Let's see, what do we have created right now? Apologize, I'm having some slow internet, so mine may take a couple of extra minutes, but let's see. Open this tab. Cool. So while everything else is creating, I think we have our Cognito created. Let's see. So Incognito, like I said, this is basically where AWS like manages your different users and stuff. So I just want to like leave a disclaimer or like add a little bit of extra insight. Like a lot of these classes or the series is going to be like pretty detailed and have a lot of different moving parts and a lot of services. I'm just trying to explain everything that Amplify is doing. You don't have to know all of these things for the basics of this, but if you wanted to use this at work or like actually in real life, like you will need to know all these different things. So I apologize if it gets a bit like I'm covering so many things and just a short amount of time, but there's just a lot of things that are going on at once. So that's why we're talking about user pools and Amplify and DynamoDB and CloudFormation and AppSync, all of them. So within here you could create like users and stuff, and you know, like maybe we save a little bit of this for like the next round, but you know, you can add like different groups and creating like groups, and you can have auth roles on a group and say like maybe you have like admin users that can do like special things. You can add them to a group called admins, and you can even create a trigger on your Cognito authentication flow, and Amplify can handle all of this. It's pretty amazing. And you could say like post confirmation, or probably one of the better parts to put it would be like post confirmation. And so basically what this would say is during the auth flow, which I'll show after everything's done creating, is we're going to have to put in our email address, and we're going to need to verify our email to make sure that we own that email before we can actually correctly create the account. And so you could set up a post confirmation trigger, which would trigger a Lambda function, and it would say like Cognito would handle it for you and say like, okay, after somebody logs in and after somebody creates an account and they successfully verify their email, we'll trigger this post confirmation Lambda, and we'll follow this post confirmation Lambda, and then we'll go ahead and like add them to the group. So I got a question. Is there a workshop we can follow to build your app to learn Amplify? Yeah, sorry, I'm doing that right now. I am just waiting for everything to create. This will be the workshop. It's just taking a little bit for everything to create all the resources and stuff. Like I have like 8 different CloudFormation stacks, so bear with me, but we'll get to like more of the Amplify stuff as this goes on. As for like what Amplify actually does for this class, if you just were like, I'm not going to get what I needed out of this, we've more or less finished the Amplify side. And most of Amplify, like I said, is all like handled for you. So the best way to learn Amplify is like to get familiar with the CLI. And then the other thing to do would be like, you know, get really good at writing schemas. Otherwise, like there's not a ton else going on with Amplify other than like the schema is basically the heart of the entire application if you're going to use AppSync and stuff. For what we're doing, this is all that we're going to cover with Amplify today. Other than the front end, and the front end has a lot of Amplify stuff as well, but for the back end, like, I mean, we basically like hit Amplify already. It's a pretty quick process. I think that's one of the pluses of it, is that you don't have to spend as much time like building everything. So to go like more into depth of like learning what's happening behind the scenes of Amplify, like we just went over Cognito a little bit. So the other thing would be like we need to do some not AppMash, AppSync. There we go. So you can see it created us an API AppSync. It gives us a schema. This is all GraphQL. And then you can see like our type log, comments, and then it generates all this for us. And then you can go ahead and start like querying your AppSync stuff and writing GraphQL. If you wanted to see like more Amplify type stuff to see like where all of that was created, you could see these different resolvers. This is written in that VTL language that I was talking to you about. This is all to connect to DynamoDB. Basically, like this one is to say like I want to request all of the blog posts, it looks like. And so yeah, you could go through there and kind of like look at what they build for you, and all of the different like stacks and CloudFormation stacks that are there. If you wanted to really get into like what Amplify is doing, we're not going to go super deep into that. But now that this is created and it's basically already set up with our front end, during that creation of the Amplify stack, we had a point where let's see. Right here, so we had enter the file path for your GraphQL queries, and so we told it src GraphQL /*/*, and so that's why there's this src GraphQL folder here. So I just wanted to do that to show like what this would do. So we could type into this prompt and be like frontend /src /GraphQL, and then it would put it in the front end folder and put it in the src folder for us. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go ahead and drag it in there and delete this folder because we don't need that. And so now we've got our GraphQL mutations and queries and subscriptions already like into our front end, and this gives us like full CRUD access. So this generated all of this for us with Amplify, and this is going to say like get blog, so pass in an ID, you get all your blog content. Mutation, like this is all GraphQL stuff, but this is like saying if I had to create a blog, how would I create it? Like, oh, I'd have to pass it an input, and input would be like an ID and a name. So that's pretty much what's going on here, and we already have this built into the front end. So what you could do, if you wanted and you've already cloned the repo, you could go ahead and run an npm start and start the application. But yeah, let's go ahead and do that. npm start. Oh, need to get into the front end directory. Cool. So this will go ahead and start our front end application, and then we can see the actual things that are going on that Amplify just built for us. Cool. So what's going on right now is it automatically with Amplify pops up a login page, and how it's doing that, this was why I hesitated a moment ago, was I wanted to talk about what's going on here. So there's two, whenever you're doing this with React, and this is going to get into a little bit of the React side of things, but you know, I think it's important that we like talk about the full stack. So if you're not super familiar with React, this might be a little bit over your head, but in the package JSON where we manage our different packages and stuff, there's two packages that we had to install, and one of them is AWS Amplify and AWS Amplify React. And then so I have like my app.js, which is the root of the whole project for React and a front end application. So we import this Amplify from that AWS Amplify folder or package and this with authenticator, and we go ahead and configure our AWS or our Amplify environment. And this AWS exports folder or file is generated by Amplify. And so it went ahead and generated this for us, and we have this folder that gives us like, this is our GraphQL endpoint. We're using Amazon Cognito, like what's our Cognito stuff and all of the stuff to like be able to authenticate our users and use the application. Keep opening the wrong thing. So this is basically initializing our Amplify environment that we just configured. And then this with authenticator, it's called a higher order function in React. And so it basically just like wraps the entire application, and it says, whenever somebody comes to the application, I want to include them with a greeting and say like, yes. And so that include greeting is going to be a way of putting this authentication. So this is going to be like, whenever you first come to this application, you need to be authenticated to use it. And so if I tried to like log in with somebody right now, it wouldn't let me, and it would like actually block me and stuff. So it's got like the full auth capabilities of like protecting your application and stuff. You can reset password. If you don't have an account, which I don't, we need to create an account. So we could do AWS Meetup Group Gmail, give it a password, give it an email, and then a phone number. You can just put in 10 digits, so put in like 10 ones. All right, so we'll create that account. Like I said before, with the authentication of Cognito, it's going to ask me for a confirmation code. So let's see, get into my email address. I should have an email. Let's see. AWS Meetup Group at gmail.com. Resend code. Where's my code? I'm having some bad internet issues right now, so maybe my code's going to take a minute to come through. So what we can go ahead and do is act like we've already copied our code in and pasted it, and then we've authenticated and we can log in. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to create my user directly in Cognito. Gives us a little bit of Cognito practice anyway. So you could go to Cognito, go to your users and groups, and put in a username. So actually, let me see. I should have already been created. Cool. So my account is just not confirmed. I think I can confirm it in here. Oh, there it was. Confirm user. Okay. So basically we're saying that we just confirmed our email. Okay. Cool. I don't know. My email is taking me a while to come through. But all right. So now that we're basically like, we've skipped that flow, kind of jumped a little bit ahead, but I needed to do it through the console because my internet's taking a bit of time. But so now I can come back to my application. I can sign in. Okay. Oh, this is new. I don't know where that came from. That must have been just pushed out today. So sweet. This is our application now. So like I said, like pretty minimal styling, but it'll get the job done for what we need to do. So like I said before, the application is that you create a blog, you create a post, and you create a comment, and then you can like have all of that related to you, and all of the relations between like all the data is there. What we should do now is like we'll go through the front end, we'll do the flow of like how it works, and then we will go ahead and show how it works in the front end, and I'll show the data in DynamoDB and show how all of that kind of got connected together with Amplify, and go from there. So we can add a blog. We'll just call it like our new blog, or hit submit. So then we've got our blog. The owner is me because I'm the one that just created it. And then I could delete my blog if I wanted to, or I can add a post. And let's say like I had this great post that I came up with, gonna save the world. And then we just smacked our keyboard a few times. So we post that. Sweet. So we've got our great post to save the world. We can click into that. We can see our post, similar to Medium. I know they're like almost a replica. And then, we could have like multiple users comment on the post, would be like the flow in the future. So then we would have like, oh, cool, like new comment, like this post is great. And then they would like start commenting on there. And then we could just be like, you know what, that's not that great. I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to delete my blogs. So that's pretty much the application as it stands right now. Like I said, this is supposed to be the bare bones and kind of the intro. So we will get into being a bit more complex come round 2. But so with that being said, let's look at like how that all kind of got connected on the front end. So everything that we just did was through one of these GraphQL operations, either a mutation or a query. If you're not super familiar with GraphQL, like queries are similar to, or like would be like a GET request with a REST API, and then a mutation would be like your creates, your updates, and your deletes. And you could even see here like create blog, update blog, and delete blog. And then you have all of that, all of the pre-written functionality right there for you. And so now all that you need to do is I have like this components folder, and I've got this home.js folder. And within home.js, I'm using that AWS Amplify package again. And it has 2 things I need in here. One's called API, and one's called GraphQL operation. If you used GraphQL before and you're a front-end dev, you've usually used like Apollo or something like that. This is using Apollo behind the scenes, but I think it's a lot easier to use because all you have to do an API call is say like API.GraphQL, and then what's my GraphQL operation? List blogs. I just import that for my queries. Bam. There's all my blogs. It's already there for me. I retrieved all the blogs from my Dynamo table, and you can see them all. So it's like really, really, really easy to use to where you're not having to set up Apollo and set up like all of your Apollo client and do like code gen. Like essentially that's what's going on behind the scenes. They just kind of extract a bit of it away from you with Amplify, and that way you're able to like get running a bit quicker. So then we've got like our blogs, and we can create blogs. So we can go to our blog and see like the blog view, and these are all pretty much the same. So this is going to do the same thing like the other operations of like a create and a delete, and getting a blog by an ID, and so you can just like pass it like a particular ID. And I'll show you these queries in AppSync and may make a bit more sense, but this is generally like the flow of how you would write this in a React application is like pretty straightforward because Amplify handles the API call. It handles the mutations and the schema, and the mutations and queries are already written for you. And so you just import them, literally call them in, send them your data, and it does all the rest for you. It's really nice. So if you guys wanted to look through the rest of this, like post a comment, I can go into all of this deeper. But until then, like let's go ahead and jump ship. I just wanted to talk a little bit about like how it's nice and they generate all of this for you, and how you would plug it into like a React application. But might make a little bit of sense if we go in here and we kind of look at some of our queries that are available to us and to our data. So before we go look at the data, we were just talking about like how all those queries are working, and so it's important to understand like what you're doing. And whenever I first learned it, I came to AppSync, wrote my queries in there in the console directly, got the data back that I wanted, kind of figured out like what GraphQL was, because I've never really used GraphQL until like maybe, I don't know, a couple of months ago. And so this is like a really good tool to come in and learn about it all. So what you need to do before you can write any queries, because everything's protected by Cognito, is you have to log in with Cognito before you can actually even use AppSync. Even though it's all in AWS and stuff, it's still secured to where you can't interact with it unless you're actually logged in and authenticated. So it asks us for a client ID, a username, and password. So the username is going to be whatever you put in on the front end. Password is going to be, again, like whatever you put in on the front end for your password for a user. And the client ID we'll have to retrieve whenever we go to our user pools. And then in our general settings, we can go to our app client. And think it's this one. Let's see. Grab our app client ID, paste that in, and we'll grab our username. Will be AWS Meetup Group at gmail.com. Password. Cool. Let's see. Sweet. So now I'm authenticated. Another cool thing that you can do is over here on the docs, you can see the different operations that you have access to. And it'll show you the schema. And so like if we wanted to create a blog, and I'll show you like how that at connection everything works. So if I wanted to create a blog right here, what I could do is run a mutation, and my mutation will be called create blog. I'll pass it JSON object of input, and it'll take in a name, and it says it takes in an ID too. In the VTL, the velocity template that it creates for us, it actually, if you don't have the ID, it automatically fills it in for you. I'll show you what that looks like. So let's see, new cool blog. So it'll generate us the ID, or if we were like, your ID sucks, I want my own ID, we could put in our own ID. We could do that as well. So now that we have this ID of my ID, I'll go ahead and copy that. And this is how those connections work together that we talked about in the schema before. Just to recap, the connection of like a blog has multiple posts, a post has multiple comments, and to go back up, a post has one blog and a comment has one post. So a one-to-many relationship. So how we would create that is we would create a post, have an input, we would put our title. Let's see, show you guys the schema. So let's see, we have a title, so it'd be cool post. Content can be content data, and then this is where the connection happens. So this post blog ID is created by Amplify automatically. So if you look back here, you can see like post blog ID is not defined in the schema at all. It's automatically generated whenever we have these add connections, and we're just giving it a name of like blog post and saying like blog post. So this way, like Amplify knows like, okay, these two connect to each other, these two connect to each other, and so it generates this blog post ID or post blog ID. And so it's like my post, what blog does it relate to? So if I do that, then I get my ID back, and if I wanted to like see the other data, you could retrieve everything here. And then if you really wanted to get crazy, you could go ahead and see the blog now and see that it relates to the My ID blog. So let's add the other relationship really quick, and we'll start doing the queries. And I'll show you the data in Dynamo. If there's any confusion, that will probably clear it all up. So the last one is to create a comment. So the comment, don't want to forget my ID here. So the comment's going to take an input. It's going to take content, my comment, and then it's going to take a comment post ID. And that'll be whatever ID you want to relate to that post. And then we could go ahead and run it, and we created our comment. And so on the front end, what we're doing with that is, let's say like we have a post. So our post has like multiple comments, right? Like you should be able to comment and like say like somebody's post is cool or it sucks or whatever. So what you can do is, let's see, where am I creating comment? So where I'm creating my comment, I'm passing in that payload like we had before. So like just how we see here in AppSync, you have like a mutation, you're creating a comment, it takes content, and it takes comment post ID. So that way it relates to that post. So the same thing would happen here is like you can set this up however you want, but I like to give it like a payload object. But so the important parts are we're giving it content just like we did in AppSync, and we're giving it a comment post ID. And then this relates to whatever post, and with React, I'm able to pass that data down to this component, and whenever I run my query or my mutation and I create this comment, it's going to do what we just did here and create that comment. And then you could see whenever you queried it, you could like try to get a particular post. So just like how we're doing on the front end, we're getting a particular post. We can say like, what is the post content? What's the post title? What's the post comments? And then comments will have items, and then it'll have an ID, just like every other object, because these are all separate tables. And then it'll have content as well. And so this way we can see like, oh look, I commented on this cool post and put my comment. And so that way I have that relationship there, or that join there that you could say, and have like, this is going to be like how your data is structured. And so this, like whenever you query it on the front end, this is what it will look like exactly whenever it comes back. And so if you wanted to get crazy and you wanted to say like, for one blog, I want to see the posts under that blog and the comments for that blog. And so what you could do is get a blog, and our blog ID was called myID, and I just put that in there to be silly. You can be called anything. So we can return the ID if we want. And this is something else to note if you never use GraphQL. Like, you have access to all of these different things, but it doesn't mean you have to use them all. That's the difference between like the REST endpoints and the GraphQL endpoints, is that you can say like, I want just the ID, or I want just the name, or I want just the posts. You don't have to retrieve everything. So with that in mind, like let's not retrieve, well, let's say I retrieve the ID first, and then we won't retrieve it the second time. So we'll retrieve the name, we'll retrieve posts. Posts, like I said, have items, and if you wanted to look at the actual query that I'm doing, you go look at your docs and see like get blog, and then it has like this blog here. It's got posts, cool, like what's the post gonna look like? Oops. Post has items, and this is coming from that global secondary index that's created. And then we can see like now we have access to the items object, which has an ID, content, and let's query that. So then we can see our blog has multiple posts. Guess I hit the button a couple of times. And then you can see your comments on a particular post. You could be like, I want to see my comment that's on the post within the blog. And then you can like go super deep into this and say, cool, I want to get a blog. What's the blog ID? It's my ID. What's the name of that blog? It's the cool blog. What's the post for that blog? Here's the items within that post. Here's all the different posts. Here's all the data within the post. Here's all the comments within the post. Here's all, like, you can continue going through it. And you could even do it reverse too, which you'll probably never use this, but you do have access to. You could go, I want to get my blog, and I want to get the ID. I think you can do this. Let's see. Yep. So we can go back and get the blog here. And if we wanted to see who the owner was, I think we have access to that. We can see that I'm the owner of it, or AWS Meetup Group is the owner of it, and they created that blog. And this is like traversing deep into that. Like now we've gotten a blog, gotten a post, gotten a blog again, and then gotten the comments. So you wouldn't want to do that, but you do have access to the data going either direction. So that's kind of like AppSync in a nutshell. It's just a lot of GraphQL queries, and how cool GraphQL is and how quick this responds. There's no Lambda involved. It's really cheap. I think it's like $4 per million requests. And yeah, yeah, so everything's going to DynamoDB. So before we go, one last thing before we go in DynamoDB is we're on the queries tab, and we've got like these data sources and functions and schema. And so like kind of talking about how this is all connected and how Amplify connected this together. So like I said, like Amplify built us this big schema. We built the small schema, and it was like, cool, we'll take over the rest and do whatever else for you. And so this is 275 lines, and we wrote it in like, I don't know, less than 20 lines. So our connections and stuff are our models that it creates. You can see here, like for this blog, it has this model post connection, which is going to create that connection between like a blog owns a post. And so a blog owns a post here. And what this is it gives us access to the actual like resolver, which, trying to not get super jargon heavy, but a resolver is essentially where you're going to write like where your data is, like what it resolves to, as in like if I make a mutation or a query, am I going to trigger a Lambda function, or am I going to query a DynamoDB table, or am I going to hit an S3 bucket? A resolver is just where the data is at, like whatever the next thing is. And so for this application as it stands, all of our resolvers are a DynamoDB table. And then you can see the actual VTL behind the scenes, and you can see like it's querying. This is like a DynamoDB query right here, and it's gonna look for that connection, and it's gonna return us based on the global secondary index of blog post and create that connection. And so all that is done in VTL, and you have access to that if you would like. And like to talk about, the thing where it generates you the ID, like you can see that in here too. I think it's in here. I think this is it. I think this one generates you the ID. I could be wrong. I haven't looked at this in a minute, but one of these functions, it'll basically generate you the ID. If you don't insert an ID, it'll create you a UUID. So all that's done in the VTL, which is the point of showing you this, is that it's kind of all the magic behind the scenes is VTL and the Amplify creations that it does. And then your last thing in here is you can see the actual tables that are created. And so with that, let's go look at the actual data. And so these data sources can be anything that you can create a data source. You can resolve to these are your options. Like it could be a relational database, an HTTP endpoint, Elasticsearch domain, Lambda function. And so you can like create your own custom ones, or you can create it to, you can like set it up in the schema to create to like, to resolve to an HTTP endpoint or whatever you need to have going on. That's where all this data is coming from. So then in our actual DynamoDB, we can see it created us 3 tables, and it gave us like this weird just ID right here. And then we have the dash master, which is to say the Amplify environment. And then we can see the different items. And so this is kind of like bringing it all together to say like, okay, reiterating it again, Amplify created us our blog table. We called it a model that makes it a table. We connected it to post. So we've got our post table, and we connected post to comments. So you can see right here, like our ID, the type name, this is created with Amplify, created at's created with Amplify, updated at's created with Amplify. But our data that we created is the name and the, I think, and the ID. And then this owner field is the other thing that's created automatically behind the scenes, and that's also through the Velocity templating language. It queries Cognito, and it returns like whatever user is logged in at the time, and then it adds that user ID or the username or email, whatever you have as your username for your authentication, and then it'll create that owner, which just want to recap one more time to really push this point. So we've got our blog, auth, allow owner, whoever logs in, they're the owner, model, creates DynamoDB, connection, creates an index to say this has multiple posts, and then we repeat, and then we repeat again. So it's pretty awesome with how it just kind of creates all of that for you. And then if you wanted to see the indexes that actually join everything together, you can go to your indexes tab. I think it's actually in my post table. Yeah. So in my post table, there I have that GSI, which is blog posts. And that name comes from our schema again, because we call our name blog posts. And so it looks at that, creates that global secondary index, and that relates to the post blog ID. And so it creates this, like, it says like join it to this partition key. And so this way, whenever we query our connection, it says cool, like on where this ID matches this ID, like a foreign key kind of set up in a SQL database, return all that data. And then in here you can see it creates us the owner, and it creates us the post blog ID, which relates to, we called it my ID, and that relates to our blog with the ID of my ID. And that's kind of like how all of that feeds in together to create this bigger nested web of like blogs, posts, and comments, and having a user who can do all the actions and have like the relationship. I don't know if anybody's ever built that from scratch, but this is definitely the quickest way and a pretty secure way that I've ever done it. So, and then the last one, if you wanted to see like comments, same thing as the post. We've got the comment post ID, which relates to the post, whoever made the comment, and then the index of the post comments. Let's see. So that's more or less like a pretty rough, like slap in the face intro to Amplify, AppSync, DynamoDB, Cognito, CloudFormation, and React. If you guys have any questions, let me know. I'll stay on for a little bit longer and do some questions. Otherwise, like we could talk about like the next iteration, the next class will be covering like a bit more in-depth things, going in a bit more, having like the fully built app, taking what we learned from our GraphQL schema, adding like a many-to-many relationship. We'll add, similar to how Medium has it with like thumbnails, we'll set up an S3 bucket that stores all of our images. So we'll upload images and we'll use AppSync to handle the images and store those into into S3, and that way we'll be able to have like a full application. And then we'll create a user table too, and we'll have a user profile page, and that user profile page you'll be able to like edit your user data, and you'll be able to like create posts and stuff. Similar to how it works in Medium, where like if I were to click here, I could see like create a story, my stories, things like that. And then you could come and look at your profile and see like your stories or whatever profile stuff that you have. And then at the end, we'll create a CI/CD pipeline, and we can, good question. How do we delete all the resources? So you can delete everything by running amplify delete, and it'll delete everything for you automatically. Whenever I was looking at the slides, I forgot one extra thing that we could do. You could run, before we delete everything, like let's go ahead and take our application, deploy it, and we can share it with people and they can start creating their blogs. So what we can do to do that is say amplify add hosting. And I know I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but adding hosting is basically going to make this so that we deploy our website now. So we're just going to do that really quickly. So what I did is I ran amplify add hosting. I selected the plugin. You get two options. The first one is to set up a CI/CD pipeline and manage custom domains. We'll do that for the next round. The other one is to manage it with CloudFront and S3. We're going to select that because the other one will take a lot longer to set up. And then we're going to just do dev because creating a CloudFront distribution takes upwards of 20 to 40 minutes. So we're just going to do it with an S3 bucket. And then we'll just call we'll just take the default. So that'll go ahead and create us a hosting resource here. And it'll basically say like, take your application and we're going to put it into S3 and deploy it. So we could run amplify publish, and that will do that. And then this way we have our full application ready deployed, ready to share with friends, so that you're able to walk away with something. If you are worried about like a cost or this costing you anything, DynamoDB has like an infinite free tier, and so the DynamoDB stuff in this like won't cost you any money unless you're like constantly using this, putting a lot of data. But for what we did today, that should be free. If you created your account on the first year, AppSync I think is free for the first like million requests, so it shouldn't cost you anything there. Cognito I think is a free tier, so it shouldn't cost you anything there. So for what we did today, everything should be free. But if you want to tear it down, we can tear it down after this is done deploying. All you would have to run is in the root, which would be the intro to Amplify project. You'd run amplify delete, and that will delete everything. And then it'll take probably 5-10 minutes, and it'll all be deleted. Oops. Did not mean to do that. You guys have any other questions? Custom resources, hosting, and CloudFront. There we go. Resources, outputs. Okay. So I accidentally closed my terminal, but if you ran it in your terminal, it should have outputted. If you wanted to not go through what I just did in the console and get it through using Amplify, you can run amplify status. Oops, cd into intro, amplify status. And then this will show you the status of everything, similar to the Git status like I talked about earlier. And then you'll have your hosting endpoint and your GraphQL endpoint. And then we could open this up. I think we got something incorrect with our hosting, but that's essentially what would happen. And then we go to our website. I think I broke something here, but I think I may have messed up our S3 bucket somehow, but that's what you need to do to get it deployed. And we'll go into like a deeper session of deploying this and creating like the CI/CD of it come tomorrow. Resources, bucket. So what I'm doing right now is going into S3 and I'm checking the permissions of the bucket. Oh, it didn't. Oh, you know what? I think I know what happened. Whenever I accidentally closed my terminal, it stopped deploying it, and so we didn't get any of the contents in there. So we could remove our hosting. We'll just say yes. So I removed everything because I accidentally messed mine up. And to fix it, we removed it, and I'm just gonna add it back. And I'll select Amazon CloudFront, Dev, S3, select the bucket, cool, Amplify, publish. I think that's a different bucket. Yeah. So that way, this time I won't accidentally close it out, and it should deploy everything, and then we should be able to have our hosted site. if you guys are not super into like doing front end stuff and seeing all the front end parts, or like Amplify is not your thing, like at minimum, I would suggest, like, if I were to pick one of the two courses to come to next, or one of the two series to come to next, I would say the third one, because I'm gonna try my best to simulate like what this would be like in production with millions of customers coming in and hitting your application, showing you like what the cost would be, showing you what how to improve cost, how performance is, and seeing like how you can improve everything on that side of things. And maybe I think that would be a pretty beneficial thing to see, if anything. So I think that will be the third Wednesday of, let's see, June 17th. So June 17th to see the cost statistics for running a serverless application, running DynamoDB at scale, running AppSync at scale, using S3, things like that. Let this thing deploy. Let's see. Okay, so we got an error really quick. I think that is because of some of my configuration I set up, because it says it can't find a file. And so what it's trying to do whenever it's hosting this endpoint is it's acting as though it's coming in here and trying to like run an npm run build, grab the build directory, put it into S3, and then create like the S3, make it public and make it a website. So it says no such file or directory, package.js. Fig. Oh, and by the way, like this needs to be updated too, so that you change it to src frontend/GraphQL. And the reason for that is I don't have an src GraphQL. How mine's set up is it's not src, it's just front end. I have a front end folder, and then within that's my source folder, and then there's my GraphQL. And so if I ever went and updated my GraphQL schema here, it would automatically update my mutations and queries here, and then this file right here is where it looks to go update it at. And so this is why we need to update this and make this correct so that it can properly update this stuff. I'm not sure what's up with this error though, but we're gonna get really deep into it on the next round with deployments. Maybe you guys will know the same error, because I'm not sure why I have that. I haven't seen this before. But talking about deleting everything, you could run Amplify delete like I said a moment ago, and I think it'll just ask you like, are you sure you want to do that? And then it will just delete everything. So otherwise, if you guys have any questions, let me know. Like I said, the next iteration will be like making this a lot bigger. I'll probably add a lot more documentation and like maybe some prereqs to come in and go along with the README and whatnot. This one I just kind of wanted to be more of a crash course. But yeah, we're going to go deeper and try to build a medium, serverless medium. So if you guys have any questions, otherwise probably get off here in about after this thing deletes. yeah, thank you for coming out. Hope you guys stay healthy with the COVID stuff. Hopefully we're going on the downward hump of that. Well, if you guys don't have any more questions, I'll update the repo so that this is like ready to be deployed, and you'll just need to basically like run an Amplify init, and you already set up your Amplify config and got your AWS profile set up, so it should be good to go if you wanted to come back and run through it. Or if you wanted to, you could just go like pull one of the old commits, and that's there too if I don't get it up before you wanted to start messing around with it. Otherwise, see you guys in another month. At the end of this month, actually, Kevin is doing a talk on data lakes and data warehouse. Jeff, this will be the same link. Give it a minute, and this will be the same link. I think YouTube takes, I don't know, probably 15, 20, 30 minutes, and then it gets to where it'll be like uploaded and stuff. But this should be the same link, the one that we're on right now. But yeah, at the end of the month, Kevin's doing a talk on, let's see, on a data pipeline, data lake, and data warehouse. And I think that this could potentially be a multi-part series to be announced, to be determined. Where did you guys go? Cool. Yep. Sweet. Hope you guys have a good night. See you guys next time.